Hello, this is your host, Renata Ortega. Welcome to today's episode of the Cycle Breaker and Changemaker podcast. This podcast is all about how to break free from negative generational cycles in order to create meaningful, lasting changes. For helpful tools and answers to your most pressing questions, be sure to follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Cycle Breaker Changemaker. I look forward to helping you on your cycle breaking and change-making journey. I promise you will find nothing more rewarding than this. Today's episode will be in a slightly different format than my regular format in order to allow me to share very important information, views, and facts. One of the most guaranteed outcomes about the human experience is that we can be short-sighted and need to learn lessons the hard way, over and over again. It is very frustrating to see just how short-sighted we can actually be. I'm on a mission to change this as it relates to childhood abuse resulting from negative intergenerational trauma cycles. Can you imagine, if even for a moment, being trapped with abusive parents during the pandemic, having nowhere to hide from them, and no safe adults to go to? The time to manage the outcome of the pandemic and its impact on children is now, not when these children become adults. We know enough about negative intergenerational trauma cycles to understand that they are unhealthy and dangerous, and that there is a huge personal and financial cost. However, what are we truly doing as a movement to prevent this? There are people trying to make a difference, yet why has this not taken off when so many, I would argue, lesser important trends and issues have? Well, there has been great headway in, for example, in some countries finally calling intimate partner violence an epidemic. The glaring and gaping hole in this resolution and realization is, what about the children? Aside from individual organizations and acts completed by governments, I'm puzzled as to why society as a whole is not looking out for the children and putting tangible measures in place to help them and keep them safe. There should be a loud and accessible discussion regarding long-term impacts of abuse as it relates to children. Children are innocent. It is a privilege to have them. They do not choose to be born, and a child is not something that is owed to anyone, ever. Additionally, our children are the future. They are the ones who will be running the show, so to speak, when we are too old to do so. So why wouldn't we want to set them up for a lifetime of happiness and success? I am living proof that one can heal from trauma, but I also know firsthand that this is a process that takes years, costs a lot of money, and is easier to walk away from than to go through. This process must be completed, though, in order to stop the vicious cycle. Let's look at the children who have lived through the pandemic as one sample group. My observation of the majority of the pandemic youth is that they have a lack of needed social skills. There's been learning loss. They have a lack of motivation, depression, anxiety, and suffer from addiction. One of the saddest results of the pandemic has been the polarization of views, the massive political divides, the violence, and the revelation of how strong systemic racism actually is. Many of these issues are beyond the understanding of such young minds, as they should be. But what happens is that younger children often adopt the views of their parents and caregivers without question, because they do not get exposed to anything else. This is incredibly dangerous if not managed and intervened. The intergenerational trauma that exists in the adult generation is a result of what our grand and great-grandparents endured through their lived experiences during and post-war, living through political upheaval, experiencing controlling governments, oppression, racism, poverty, immigration to a new country fleeing from another in an effort to forge a better pathway forward for their family. These are generations where mental health was never discussed. Instead, it was dismissed, and those that experienced it were given horrible names like witches. They were treated as lesser than, as if there was something wrong with them, when in fact, this was a result of inherited trauma or the result of traumatic experiences. Our ancestors were, of course, not immune to mental health disorders or trauma. And if not processed and not discussed out in the open, these issues move forward through to the next generation in many ways. Now let's look at the financial cost of all of this. I'm going to give you some numbers to help put the problem into perspective. I expect most of you will be shocked to see how costly the problem actually is. In 2018, child abuse cost Canadians $23 billion annually, and in the United States of America, the cost was $2 trillion annually. This was in the form of healthcare, court fees, social services, and the long-term effects on earnings. This number is conservative because we know that all cases are not reported or addressed. And this number has only increased over time. In 2023, a study came out explaining that in the United States, the economic burden of health conditions caused by adverse childhood experiences was $14 trillion. The countries I have just mentioned are prosperous. The United States is the world's third most wealthiest nation, and Canada is the world's eighth most wealthiest nation. Can you imagine what is happening in countries that are not as prosperous? Now you can understand why I am so puzzled as to why we are not doing more about this. Please share this information with those around you. People need to be aware of a problem and then admit to it in order to make progress. This theme flows through my previous episodes. In order for us to work through our traumatic experiences, we need to acknowledge their very existence in the first place. If anyone out there needs help pushing this movement forward, please let me know. I would love to talk to you and see how we can make a positive, meaningful change together. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Cycle Breaker and Changemaker. I would love to hear from you and to receive your feedback. Remember, you can reach me on Instagram or Facebook at Cycle Breaker Changemaker. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts in order to help me continue to help you. I am looking forward to having you join me for the next episode. Until then, please take care.